Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're very excited for hosting this webinar with Helen today, and I'm joined by my co-host, Jason. My name is Nuzha Tooney, and I'm co-chair for the North Branch of IIBA UK. And I'll be keeping an eye on the chat to see any comments from you. So do not hesitate to use that to engage with us. And I'll hand over to Jason, who will be facilitating the rest of the session. So straight over to you, Jason.
Thanks very much, Nozza. For those that don't know me, I'm Jason Valentine. I'm one of the newer volunteers in the IIBA North region, and it's a real pleasure to welcome you all tonight, wherever you're logging in from and wherever you perhaps saw yesterday's eclipse from. I've spent more than 2 decades in the business analysis profession at Aviva. Been at Aviva for just over 30 years and a long-time advocate of this marvellous profession. I speak at the occasional industry events, including the BA Conference Europe, and hopefully sharing insights with many people who I meet, along with great people like our special speaker tonight. So I'm delighted to be hosting, and as an IIBA volunteer, it's great to bring together professionals from all over the country and potentially all over the world. I'm not sure how far the furthest person is dialing in from, but you're all very welcome here. It's all about growing our skills, building our confidence and our wonderful community. So thanks for joining us. And with that, we'll get started. So just a few ground rules to cover, some housekeeping points. The webinar is being recorded and it'll be available on the IIBA UK YouTube channel. Please do use the chat to engage with the session as we go through and share your thoughts and what you're getting out of the session. The reactions are enabled, so it'd be really good to see you with your likes and your hearts and everything like that. We can see that you're engaging in the session, so please do that. And there's a Q&A as well, so please do use the Q&A thread in Zoom to ask any questions, which we'll make sure are picked up either at the end or as we go through. Okay, so just to introduce our fabulous speaker tonight is Helen. Helen is the Head of Business Analysis at the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. She was a BA of the Year finalist in 2022. She's a regular presenter on the conference circuit, and I think this year is your 3rd year, Helen, presenting at the BA conference, a hat trick. This event, we're going to be replaying a brilliant talk that she did last year called Mental Monsters, where she explores the limiting beliefs that hold us back, and she's going to be sharing us some practical insights and everyday techniques for building our confidence and moving to a more positive mindset. Helen's a passionate leader, someone who openly shares her journey to help others grow. So please welcome Helen, and over to you to something that I'm sure we're really looking forward to. So thank you, Helen.
Thank you. I'm just going to do the difficult technical part where I try and share my screen. So hopefully this is going to work. Are we seeing that okay?
That's come through great, Helen.
Brilliant. Okay, so firstly, I'm going to start off with a few thank yous. So thank you to everybody that has made the time to join the call today, firstly, because it's an incredibly warm day. And I'm sure many of you might have kind of be feeling a bit frazzled after a day at work. So thank you for taking an hour out of your evening to come and listen to me talk. And I do hope that you go away feeling like it was an hour well spent. But also a big thank you to IIBA UK, and in particular Nozha and Jason from the North Branch for actually inviting me along. What I'm talking about today is something that I'm really passionate about, and so getting the opportunity to kind of share it with more people is fantastic. So thank you for that. As Jason said, I'm Helen Holder. I am the Head of Business Analysis at RICS, or the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, if you want to give it the full mouthful. And a couple of things that you can kind of see about me on the screen, and perhaps 2 in particular that I'll call out. So I've worked in business analysis for over 15 years, and I have had the privilege of sort of managing and leading other BAs for at least 10 of those years. And the reason that I highlight that is to say that just the fact that I've got years of experience and that I might be in a senior role doesn't make me immune to kind of negative emotions and to these kind of limiting self-beliefs and self-doubt. I think that's an important thing for us to remember. And the second thing that I always like to highlight is that one of my most important roles in the world is as mom to my 9-year-old twins, Jack and Emily. And they always get a big shout out when I cover this topic, because actually it's them, that they were the ones that inspired this session and the content of it. And in fact, played a really big role in actually coming up with some of it as well. And we'll see a bit more about that as we go through. So we're going to be talking today about mental monsters and how we can name and tame our limiting beliefs. Now, as I said, it's a topic that I'm really kind of passionate about, but just to explain a bit of the rationale and the reason behind that, I'm going to sort of take us back a little bit to 2020. So before the pandemic, at the beginning of the year, I was at this point working as a lead business analyst for a government organisation that was going through a particularly sort of significant piece of change, so quite a strategic change that was going on. And as part of my role, I was working with subject matter experts and senior stakeholders to really kind of understand how we were going to approach this piece of change, and to kind of sort of make sure that we'd got all of the right sort of things being considered. And so we were kind of knee deep in sort of in-person meetings and workshops, where there'd be sort of around 10 to 12 people sort of coming together and kind of working through all of this. So when the sort of COVID hit and we were all kind of thrust into working from home, it had a really big impact for me on ways of working. And it kind of seems weird to think about it now, because it's almost become second nature. But back then, having to shift from kind of doing things in person to doing these sessions in a sort of virtual setting was really daunting. Firstly, it wasn't something that I was massively kind of familiar with. I had mainly been office based and sort of used to kind of getting out my post-its and things like that. Also, because the sort of virtual world opened up those sessions to a wider audience, I found that rather than the sort of like half a dozen or sort of maybe maximum of 20 people that we were used to dealing with, meetings would get forwarded on, managers would bring their whole teams, and you would end up with a really big cast of people all wanting to kind of be part of the session, which was difficult to manage. There was also at that time not a culture of having cameras on, so I was often doing these sessions what felt like completely blind. So all of the cues that I was used to depending on to make sure that people were engaging with what I was saying and kind of that my messaging was landing were completely removed from me. And I would often sort of say something and there would just be this awful tumbleweed moment where I couldn't see any facial expressions. I'd got no idea whether the silence was a good silence or a bad silence. And then whereas we've got all of these fantastic tools nowadays like Mural and Miro, I really didn't have that. So trying to create these interactive sessions with a bit of PowerPoint and a bit of sort of maybe Microsoft Whiteboard, again, kind of left those sessions feeling quite clunky and made me feel essentially that I wasn't doing a great job. And so I was coming away from these sessions with my confidence being sort of chipped away at more and more and more. And of course, at the same time, because of what was going on with the pandemic, I'd got my kids at home. They were toddlers at the time. Their nursery was shut. So I was juggling kind of parenting, and there was no kind of grandparents on hand to help sort of alleviate the load of that. You know, social distancing meant that none of those normal support networks were available. And just generally, there was some really terrifying news that we were hearing constantly at the time. So coupled with that kind of lack of confidence I was experiencing in my professional life, there was also this incredible level of anxiety that I was kind of feeling as a result of everything else that was going on in the world at the time. And my mental well-being took a real hit, I think it's fair to say. And I was worried about that from my own perspective, but this is my children as they were then. This is Jack and Emily. their routine had been completely upended as well. They hadn't got the usual structure of nursery and time with their grandparents. And I was also conscious of the impact it was having on them. And I wanted really desperately to be able to talk about how I felt. I wanted to be able to talk with my children about what they were going through and the emotions they were experiencing. But that felt like a very big conversation to have with two very small people. And I really didn't necessarily know where to begin. But ultimately, I sort of thought, well, the one thing that we've always loved in our family is storytelling. I have a tradition of making up stories and little songs and ditties and characters that I share with my kids. That's always been something that I've done. And so I thought, well, why not use that? And that's what I did. I started to create little characters based around kind of the emotions and the things that I was feeling, and to build little stories around them. And over time and over years, this actually continued. So beyond that moment of the pandemic, we continued to do this. And as the children got older, and here they are, a little bit bigger than they were, and they're even bigger than that now. But they started to come up with their own characters as well. They started to continue that storytelling and use it as a way to talk to me about what was going on in their worlds. And so I sort of thought, and we thought, if that has been a way for us to have better conversations as a family, if it's allowed us to sort of actually talk about things more openly and with more confidence, wouldn't it be great if we could share that with other people and help them to do the same? And so that's what I'm going to do today. I'm hopefully going to share with you a little bit about what we came up with, share with you some approaches and techniques to help you with that. And hopefully at the end you go away feeling a little bit more empowered to deal with some of the challenges that you might be facing right now. And we're going to start by actually meeting the monsters, actually meeting some of these characters. So this is a small selection of the characters that myself and Jack and Emily have developed over the years. And so here we go. The first one is this little fellow, Problem Blob and the Worrywarts. So this guy is this kind of big, gelatinous, translucent creature that actually starts out life as a much smaller little worrywart that initially just kind of attaches itself to you and sort of feeds off your worries. And as it's doing that, it grows bigger and bigger and bigger. And although, because it's translucent, you might not notice that you're carrying it around, other people might not notice that you're carrying one of these around. Over time, as they grow, you will start to feel the weight of them. And this was really just a depiction that talks about the fact that in real life, if we're dealing with a really meaty problem, it can actually come with a real physical sensation of, a weight that we're carrying on our shoulders or on our back. And it can be, because they're very sticky, really difficult to shake off. And although we might sort of try and take ourselves out of the scenario where the problem is occurring, we might still find ourselves kind of thinking about it. So if the problem is something that's affecting us at work, even when we're out with friends and family, socialising, we might still find that issue is weighing heavy on our minds. When we're dealing with problems, it can be very difficult to kind of switch off from them, to actually relax, because your mind kind of is constantly whirring around, trying to find a solution and a way through this problem. So it can have some impacts on our ability to actually kind of rest and recoup. So that's our first monster. The next one is one that I always sort of call out as being one of my greatest foes. So this is the seeds of doubt. These little fellows kind of crawl into your ear, they tunnel down, and they kind of huddle together, and they kind of set off on this chorus, whispering to you all the worst things about yourself that they can think of. So they're telling you all the things that you're no good at. They are discouraging you from trying anything new. They are kind of pointing out all of, your kind of flaws and foibles, and essentially kind of undermining you, making you undermine yourself, so that you ultimately sort of miss out on opportunities. And so this representation of self-doubt is a real reminder that actually these voices in our heads can really make us mistrust ourselves. They make us underestimate our own capabilities. But I think also worth noting is that they make us mistrust other people. So you might find that even when people are coming to you and paying you a compliment or giving you positive feedback about work that you've done, that you're really dismissive of that, because actually these voices have kind of taken over the narrative. And when you're dealing with self-doubt, I think you can also struggle to share your true opinions, because you'll be constantly second guessing yourself, thinking, well, what if I've got it wrong? What if people don't agree with me? What if I sound stupid? All of those things. And it can ultimately either make us dilute the messages that we're trying to put out there, or maybe just not say anything at all and just keep quiet. And when we're sitting with self-doubt over a period of time, if we're constantly kind of hearing this voice telling us that we're no good, it can really lead to these other emotions as well. So there's a link between a lot of these beliefs that we're going to talk about, and it can lead to things like overwhelm and fear. So the next one up, this little creature called Tremble, actually was inspired by my daughter. So this is one that she came up with. So my daughter Emily, when she was very little, when she started school, absolutely hated it. It was a real challenge to get her in, off the playground and into her classroom every morning, and it was heartbreaking. And eventually she came to me and she explained to me what it was that she was feeling and why she was so reticent to go in. And she talked about it, that she felt like her whole body was being covered in spikes, like it was somebody like poking at her, and that she felt like she'd got electricity running through her fingers. And so that's exactly what this little creature is. Tremble represents anxiety. It's made of this barbed fur that attaches itself to you a bit like a burr, and it lets off this kind of real kind of low level current of electricity, which it's not massive, but it's enough to kind of make you feel on edge, to make you feel uncomfortable, jittery and apprehensive. Because like a lot of the emotions that we're going to talk about, you may actually experience real physical sensations when you're dealing with these. So in the case of anxiety, it could leave you kind of feeling like your heart is really beating fast in your chest, like you're feeling a little bit shaky, maybe even that you're a bit sort of sweaty and clammy. So some real physical responses. And also anxiety can impact, I think, our ability to concentrate. So we might all have been in a situation, like, for example, where we've sat in a meeting, knowing that the time is going to come for someone to ask us a question and we're going to have to speak and give our opinion. And the dread of that moment, the anxiety of that moment, means that that's all you can think about. And you actually forget to listen to the rest of the conversation that's going on in the meeting. I know that's something that has affected me. And when we're dealing with sort of long periods of anxiety, it can start to affect our sleep. It can lead to sort of fatigue and tiredness. So, it feeds into this really vicious cycle of the more tired we feel, the more unprepared and anxious we feel. And so it kind of just feeds this repetition, this cycle. Next up is cloister. So cloister, again, is another one that I've kind of found myself being challenged with over time. And it's really kind of thinking about self-isolation. So cloister is this character, this monster that lives away in its little shell. It doesn't really like to interact with people, and it hides away and wants to remain hidden. And in order to protect itself, it kind of shoots out these bubbles. And if any one of us was to get caught in these bubbles, then we ourselves will find ourselves a little bit separated from everything that's going on around us. So it's that sense that there's this kind of invisible barrier that is separating us from other groups and other things that are going on. And I think when you're dealing with this one, I hear lots of people talk about imposter syndrome, like wondering whether they belong in their role or in their organisation. And I think that really feeds into this kind of feeling of isolation and separating yourself from everybody else. And because of this, because of that kind of feeling of kind of being a bit set apart, maybe feeling a bit awkward in certain situations, you might find yourself sort of slowly kind of drifting, to the edges of any kind of group gatherings, so team events and things like that. You might find that you struggle to engage fully. And you may even get to the point where, because it feels so difficult and like so much hard work and so draining, that you actually stop participating in those things and you avoid them altogether. And again, a little bit like the seeds of doubt, you may kind of feel hesitant to speak up or respond in certain situations. But this is less to do with your own kind of self-belief. It's more to do with the kind of psychological safety that you feel. So you might 100% believe in what you've got to say, but you don't feel safe to say it. That's the sort of differentiation here. You might just feel unable to speak up because you really don't feel like you're in an environment where you're free to do that. So that's cloister. Next then is another one that one of my kids came up with. This is maelstrom. So this one came about when my son Jack, again, was sort of in the early stages of school. He was much more excited about school, and he'd come bounding home one day. He was straight up to his room. But then sort of a short while afterwards, he sort of emerged back in the kitchen, looking a bit kind of distressed and a bit upset and agitated. And so when we started to talk about it, he actually drew out a picture that was very similar to the one that's on the screen now. He drew this whirlwind, and he just said to me that he felt like he'd learned all these new things at school today, and he was thinking about all of those. And then he'd gone up to his room and he'd seen all of the different toys and things that he could do, and he just didn't know what to pick. And he was upset because he just stood there and he didn't know what he was supposed to do, and it sort of made him feel anxious. And so maelstrom then is exactly that. It's that overwhelm. It's that whirlwind of various different ideas and, things that we've got on our to-do list, all these things that stack up, that we end up kind of like whizzing around in our minds. And because there's so much kind of going on with this, we lose all sense of kind of clarity, and just kind of are left feeling very confused and really unsure of where to start to unpack these things. And with this emotion, when we're feeling this overwhelm, it has this really bizarre, I think, effect where we have this physical sensation of feeling very rushed, very urgent, like we need to do something. We know we need to jump into action, but we're also kind of a little bit frozen to the spot. So there's this inertia there at the same time. And with this one, you might also find yourself battling with looping worries. So again, a little bit different from the problem blob where you focused on a singular big problem. This is just your brain dotting between lots and lots of different sort of worries and concerns. And when you're dealing with so much, when you're sort of hopping all over the place, there's a much higher likelihood that you might kind of forget something. So we might all have been there where we've been so busy kind of worrying about all these different things, including the big deadline that we've got to meet. We actually end up missing the deadline because we've kind of been drawn and we've pulled ourselves in so many different directions. And I think in normal times, there's lots of kind of like simple tasks that we might kind of take in our stride. When we're feeling overwhelmed, even those very simple things might become these huge obstacles that we just don't know where to start with, and therefore we kind of we end up feeling very, very stuck. So last but by no means least, we have this horrible little creature, which is Goosebump. So this is this kind of fleshy, bumpy little monster that has this very big, wide-eyed stare. It has this icy breath. And when you are around this one, you just get this sense of dread in the very pit of your stomach. And you'll kind of feel that your muscles will start to tense, your heart will start to race, and you'll be kind of like thrust into that fight, flight, or freeze sort of scenario. Because this is all about fear. And fear can create some particularly strong physical reactions, to the point where maybe you find yourself actually kind of bursting into tears. People can, sometimes be physically sick. It can have some really, really strong reactions when we're feeling this emotion. And we might find ourselves in scenarios that shouldn't be threatening, but actually, because fear is at play, we end up with this kind of heightened sense of awareness. So we might end up sort of scanning the environment and picking up on things in a very different way. So it might be that somebody's body language or tone of voice sort of triggers some sort of alarm bells in our head that might not normally have been something that we would have noticed, because our mind and our body at this point are intent on scanning for danger for us. And again, always worth remembering that fear, because it is such a big emotion, as people struggle to kind of wrestle control back, you can end up sort of viewing this as different emotions. So it can actually end up coming across as something more like anger. So again, just being mindful of how it can kind of transform itself. So that is our little cast of mental monsters that we're going to meet today. And we're now going to just share a poll and ask which of these mental monsters do you feel that you relate to most when it comes to your own limiting beliefs, either now or kind of in the past. And I think you're able to choose more than one, but I would ask you to maybe just stick to the ones that are kind of the real kind of tricky ones for you. So I'll give people a few moments to do that. And whilst you're just casting your votes, it's always interesting, this one to me. So I've done this session a number of times now, and there tends to be some sort of patterns that come out in these votes. So it'd be interesting to see whether there's anything different that's shared today, or whether it follows the pattern. We'll see.
It's almost like a place your bets, Helen.
It is a little bit, isn't it? Yeah.
We're 28 on the call, so we're just wait another few moments.
Yeah. Just a gentle reminder for everybody on the call, once you've done the poll, that the Q&A is open, so any questions or thoughts that you've got, just feel free to engage with that and the main chat, and Nozza and I'll return to it at the end.
And there's no right or wrong answer on this one. This is just, as I say, it is just to sort of get a sense of, what do people feel that they struggle with.
I think I can end the poll now and share the results.
Yes. Yeah, it's an interesting one on this one. So seeds of doubt quite often are the ones that do come out on top. But it's really interesting. Every now and again, cloister does creep up. So it's normally seeds of doubt and maelstrom that are the two. So the ones about self-doubt and overwhelm. But it's really interesting because cloister does occasionally kind of come out in groups, and it seems like that kind of self-isolation, that imposter syndrome one, has kind of crept up a little bit here. So thank you all for sharing that. That's fantastic. And just always just interesting to see how a group kind of feels about these characters. Okay, so with that done, we're going to move on to our next part of the presentation, which is all about unshaming them. So in that first part, the important bit was about us acknowledging and sort of identifying what it was that was actually challenging us. And that's a really important step, okay? We need to kind of understand what it is that's actually kind of impacting us day to day and kind of put a name to it. And that's great, but it still kind of means that we're internalizing it. And I think it's that internalizing of these emotions that gives them power. And I think we still attach way too much stigma to actually kind of owning up and saying that this is something that we're struggling with. I believe that people still feel, to themselves, that if I tell someone that I'm going through this, people are going to think, less of me. You think about yourself, I think that it means somehow that because you're suffering with anxiety, that it must mean that you're not good enough. And you also, I think, begin to think that other people will feel that way as well. But the reason for doing that poll, as much as anything, was to show that actually these are things that everybody experiences, or, you know, certainly most people. You know, there were 28 people on the call. There was everybody kind of casting a vote there. So these are not things that are abnormal for you to feel. And I think that's really important. They are normal human emotions. And actually, they're really important human emotions in some cases. Or there's a reason why we have a fear response. You know, it's there to kind of keep us safe. These are things that have evolved and are part of us for a reason. But importantly, we need to find a way, I think, to create safe spaces to talk about them, to be able to openly share about them. And that's the best way for us then to begin to plot a way forward. And so with that in mind, what I always do on these is talk a little bit about, you know, my own experiences with these mental monsters. Now, the slide that you can see here is the one that I normally talk around and sort of kind of speak to when I've done this before. But when I came to do it this time, I actually reflected on the fact that this year I went through quite a big transition at the beginning of the year, moving from sort of 10 years as a civil servant into, you know, moving into private sector and into a new role. And actually, I acknowledge that some of these mental monsters really reared up for me again. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and I'm going to pull a couple of these out and talk about how that has sort of manifested for me. So certainly in that shift in environments, going from sort of civil service into private sector, the seeds of doubt have rang very loud in my ears this year. And I worried, and I heard these voices that said, yeah, you might have done a good job, you know, in those organizations, but that's not going to translate into where you're going. You know, you're not going to be good enough. You're going to be, people are going to find you out. You're going to, you know, stumble, you're going to fall. So there was a lot of those kind of really negative voices in my head telling me that I was going to fail, and kind of like really worrying about how, you know, how this new role was going to pan out for me. So that was a really big one that I had to think about. Ironically, the other one was tremble, the anxiety one, because actually I shifted from having worked for the last sort of 3 years in a more virtual setting, where I'd become actually really used to doing virtual workshops with my team that was spread all across the UK, to actually now being based 3 days in an office where the majority of meetings and workshops are done in person. So I found myself being asked to come and facilitate these workshops, and actually panicking about whether I still had the skills to actually do that in a face-to-face environment, because it felt like actually I was now more comfortable with the virtual setting. So I was finding myself kind of awake late at night, worrying about, you know, how I was going to run those sessions, what materials would I need, you know, what would I need to do to kind of make sure it was a success, running through conversations in my head and really kind of working myself up into a bit of anxiety. And then I think a fairly constant one, you know, that poll showed that overwhelm is something that we all experience. This year, I found myself joining a new organisation. It was a new domain, had new people that I needed to meet, new ways of working and tools that I needed to learn, all of these kind of different projects and things going on that I needed to get stuck into. And my brain just felt like it was fit to explode. There was so much information that I was trying to sort of process and find my way through, that definitely I think that there was too many tabs open in my brain, and there were moments of real overwhelm during that kind of journey. And the good news is that because of all of the work that I've done over the past couple of years, what I did feel was that I was better equipped to actually nip some of those things in the bud and to deal with them. Now, the next step of this, so if I do this in a face-to-face environment, I normally invite people to kind of share verbally, you know, what some of their challenges are at the moment. We can't do that because this is a virtual webinar, but I am going to see if there is anybody who maybe feels brave enough to share in the chat one of the mental monsters that you're currently struggling with. And just simply, what is that mental monster? What's the impact that that's having for you at the moment? And we don't want any more than that. I'm not asking people to step in and give advice. I just want us to try and see if there's any people in the audience that feel comfortable to share. So just sort of, I guess, pause to see if anything comes through there. Jason, I can't see the chat at the moment, so I'm going to ask you and Noza to be my eyes on this one.
No problem, Helen, we're on it.
I can also unmute people if they want to share live.
I mean,
No,
in the absence of anything in the chat, we do have a question from Manoj, which is related to what you've just asked. And that is, what makes the seeds of doubt the most relatable mental monster, and what helps us challenge that self-doubt before it shapes our decisions?
That's a tough question. That's a good question, but it's a tough one, isn't it? I think we're all at our core. We've all kind of got those self-doubts. Ego is kind of, if you do any psychology, like we've all got an ego, right? But that's quite a fragile thing. And I think most people generally need some sort of reassurance. We're quite social creatures as human beings, and so we need that reassurance. And I think sometimes just when we get too stuck into our own heads, it becomes really easy to just sort of to undermine that, to kind of question our own abilities. I think there are less people out there that have kind of this natural confidence, and there are certainly more people whose kind of thought patterns are wired up to question things. I think particularly as BAs, because we question a lot, then it almost becomes obvious that we're going to also question ourselves, I think. So if you're the type of person that's very analytical and constantly asking questions, I guess you're sort of a bit more prone to doubting yourself in a way.
Yeah.
I don't know
Thanks,
whether that
Helen.
makes sense or helps, but
I think it does, and Manoj can reply in the chat. And Sonia's kindly added a thought in here. Thank you, Sonia, for opening up. I can relate to the worrywart a lot, and I tend to overthink when I'm planning a workshop or dealing with multiple stakeholder sessions. That leads to over planning and takes up a lot of my personal headspace.
I think that's a really good one, Sonia. I think, yeah, and also I think as Jason said, thank you for sharing, because it is always difficult to be the first person to say something. But I think that's something that I hear lots of people talk about, being really worried, maybe being perfectionists because they sort of overthink things and struggle to kind of put things out there because of that worry of what might get fed back to them or whether they're going to get it wrong. So I'm sure that's something that's really relatable to a lot of people. Now, the point again of kind of asking people to share a little bit there is that I think it's really important that individually we look at opportunities to create these safe spaces, maybe in the teams that we work in, maybe in our home environments, just as ways that we can just start those conversations and stop apologizing, for ourselves for feeling these things. And there's something a little bit liberating about kind of just saying it and putting it out there. I've certainly found, and part of the reason that I love doing this session is that as soon as somebody goes first, it opens the door for other people. And it's kind of my little sort of mission in life to give people permission to talk about what it is that's challenging them. And if I need to be the one who goes first in order to do that, then I'm going to do that. So well done to people who've shared anything in the comments.
There is one more, Helen, if you've got time to take it now,
Yeah.
if that's all right. It's from Manoj, all the way from Ely. I've spent many a time at Ely on my way to Norwich. Lovely place. Which of these mental monsters has the biggest... I just moved up there as I was reading it. Which of these mental monsters has the biggest impact on how we work with others, and how can we overcome it?
So I think probably sometimes it's that cloister one, that tendency to withdraw and kind of take ourselves away from other people, because ultimately that kind of prevents us from, being collaborative. It stops us from having some of those conversations. It stops us from building trust in those relationships, and it just isolates us. But I think, as I've sort of said, I think the first trick with a lot of this is really just recognizing it, calling it out. And the minute you've identified it, you've taken a really important first step, I think is what I would say. And we will look at some of the techniques, I think, as we go through. And actually, that's actually a very nice segue, Manoj, into the next section, which is all about, if I can get the screen to move on, all about taming them and being your own hero. So I always like, when I do these sessions, not just to kind of open up the conversation, but then to try and provide people with some kind of practical tools and things that they can take away that actually leave you feeling a little bit empowered, I hope. And so within this, I'm going to introduce you to something called the Confidence Canvas. So this is intended as just a little bit of a thinking framework that helps you plan through and think about whatever of those mental monsters it is that you're challenged by right now, some practical steps that you can take to start to overcome them. And I'm going to go through each of the sections now. I'm going to suggest some sort of exercises and different things that you could do just as an illustration point for each section, but do feel free to kind of go away and do your own thinking and research around this and kind of apply your own techniques and things that you find for yourself. But we begin in the middle with naming your monsters. So we've done that right at the beginning of this section. This bit is just around, let's identify and really take ownership of what it is, what is this thing that's challenging us. And you can do this in a number of different ways. You can feel free to use the kind of characters that I've introduced to you today. You can just kind of think, just write a list of the emotions, the negative things that are, so talking about, I'm struggling with, self-doubt, I'm struggling with maybe sort of anger or, overwhelm, whatever it might be. But what I would really recommend that you do is that you actually have a go at creating your own monsters, your own characters. And the reason that I recommend this is genuinely because there is some science around this that says when we engage the creative and playful sides of our brain, it kind of does things to our ability to problem solve, okay? It opens up new pathways, new neural pathways, and it kind of improves our ability to do that problem solving, and it kind of allows us to think from different perspectives. So it's a really good way, using that kind of playful approach, to look at this problem that you are experiencing through a different lens. So have a go, get out some pencils, get out some pens, have a go at creating your own characters. The next bit is connect. So again, we've talked about this. This is really about kind of actually externalizing it, finding someone that you can go and talk to. Doesn't mean coming on a webinar necessarily and doing that, or sitting in a big team meeting. It could just be seeking out that one person in your network that you feel comfortable talking to. And with that in mind, this is another model that I came up with called the 4 C's model that might help you think about who could be a good person to speak to. So the 4 C's are just a way of categorizing the different people you might have in your network. So the people that you work with, the groups that you're part of, your family, your friends. The first C is for connector. So these are the people that help kind of connect you to, they know where all the resources are. And importantly, they probably are the people that know other people. So they're very good at making introductions and helping to sort of introduce you to others. And so a connector could be a really great person to go and speak to if one of the things you're struggling with is that cloister piece. So if you are kind of feeling like you don't know how to engage in certain groups, you're feeling a bit on the periphery, finding someone who's a connector to help you could be, and to talk to them about it, could be really useful. The next C is counsel. So these are your subject matter experts. These are the people who have kind of got good knowledge around particular topics and are therefore going to be really well placed to give you some like actual practical advice and guidance. So these are the people I would go to if I was suffering with like maybe the problem blob, people that can help you work through that, break it down and find a way forwards. Then we have our cheerleaders. So these are our kind of really positive people, the ones that always like to shout out about other people's achievements, that are not all about kind of hogging the limelight. They're really willing to kind of call out the hard work of others. So cheerleaders, I think, can be really good where you're dealing with self-doubt, because they're often people that will really help you look at yourself through a different lens, to see yourself in a different light, and they will help you sort of champion you to you, is what I would say. And then the final C is for confidants. So these aren't experts necessarily. They may not be people that we go to for advice per se, but they are people that we feel safe with and that we trust. So if we're dealing with something that's particularly sensitive or kind of highly emotional, we feel that we can kind of go to them with that without fear that they're going to either belittle us or go off and tell a load of people. So if you're dealing with something a little bit more intense, like fear, like sadness, you know, those might be the people that you want to go to. So that is our connect section. We've then got reframe. So this is about just kind of trying to look at our problem, trying to look at the monster that we're dealing with in a different light. So the example that I've got here is a little bit around the seeds of doubt, I guess. And I call it the power of yet, but it's actually a technique that comes from a series of books that I really love called the Change Ninja books. And it starts with us writing down the thing that it is that we think we can't do. So, you know, I can't go and be a senior BA, or I can't speak in public. Whatever that thing might be, you write it down. And the very first thing that you then do is you add the word yet to the end of that sentence, because straight away you are then kind of changing the intent of that, and you're changing the outlook of that sentence to something that's much more positive and has much more of a growth mindset attached to it. We then need to think about evidence of, well, where have we been able to overcome a challenge in the past? So think of something that you used to be unable to do, but you can now do. So that could be around, you know, an ability to, you know, I used to be unable to knit, but now I can, or I used to be unable to drive a car, but now I can, or, you know, to do a particular technique or whatever it might be, something you used to be able to do, you unable to do, sorry, but now you can, because that is evidence to our own brains that we've previously sort of learned and grown and overcome an obstacle. And once we've identified that thing, we need to sort of break it down a little bit further, and we need to think about, well, you know, what were the steps that I took in order to gain that skill? What resources did I need in order to kind of to develop it? And really, really importantly, what mistakes did I make? Because identifying the fact that we've made mistakes is a really important piece in kind of recognizing that those mistakes are an important part of our learning. And then all of that can be used to kind of create a plan for your current challenge. So, okay, you know, how can I break that down into steps? Who are the people that I can go and ask for help? What are the mistakes that I'm going to allow myself to make? So that's the power of yet. But there is various different websites. This is an NHS website that has got some really good cognitive behavioural therapy techniques on there, like worry time and things like that, that might also be helpful as a way of reframing. We talked when we were looking at the monsters that quite a few of these came with kind of physical responses. And so this next box is the regulate box, is really about, you know, how we can deal with some of those in the moment. There's a couple of different things that you can do here. I'm a big fan of breathing techniques, and this is one of my favourite ones. And it's called the physiological sigh. So you can join in with me if you want to. I'm going to have a go at doing it now. But it involves taking a really deep breath in through your nose. You then, when you think you've reached the top of that breath, you try and take in a little bit more. So another short breath through the nose, and then a really slow exhale. And you do that 3 or 4 times. Now, that is a technique that when your body is having lots of sort of cortisol and adrenaline thrown at it, so when you're dealing with like high anxiety, stress, and fear even, this kind of helps to re-engage what's called the parasympathetic nerve. So that's the bit of your brain that will send some signals and start saying, it's okay, we're not in danger. And it will start to reduce your heart rate. It will start to normalize your breathing. So that one can be really good, as I say, if you're dealing with anxiety. We've also sort of talked about overwhelm. I certainly find that when my brain's dotting around, I need to do something to reset it. So this is a technique I use quite a lot called the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique. And essentially it's about kind of creating a list in your brain that looks for 5 things that you can see, 4 that you can touch, 3 that you can hear, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 that you can taste. And just in working through that list, your brain will suddenly become distracted from all of this myriad of other stuff that you were kind of thinking about. And it starts to just kind of direct your sort of thought patterns back into something a little bit more regulated. And then finally, we have the challenge box. So this is a really important box. This is about setting ourselves a target for growth. So making sure that we don't just kind of sit and sort of consign ourselves to living with these negative emotions and mental monsters, but that we try and look for things that can push us beyond them. So if you are dealing with sort of anxiety around speaking in public, it could be that you set yourself a challenge around just speaking up more in your team meeting. The scale and the size of the challenge that you set really has to be down to you and something that you're comfortable with. So, you know, I'm not going to tell anybody that you need to start to go out and kind of like sign yourself up for, you know, big presentations or conference talks and things like that. But, you know, you decide what is the right kind of limit for you. But importantly, just remember that it's this challenge that's going to be where the real transformation is going to happen, because a lot of what we've looked at is really about the fact that those mental monsters are kind of, we're letting them take control and they're showing up in places where they shouldn't be showing up. This is about kind of showing those monsters who is in charge. And every time we set a goal that takes us out of our comfort zone, that's what we're proving to ourselves, that we're the ones in the driving seat. So I really want you to go away from the session today remembering that building your confidence, kind of addressing these negative emotions and limiting beliefs, isn't about never feeling them. It's not about never feeling scared or anxious or worried. It is simply about continuing to sort of move forward and develop yourself despite of those feelings and not kind of allowing yourself to get stuck. And so with that said, that brings us to the end of the session, and you all can take away your Monster Slayer badge. And I'll open the floor up to any questions.
Helen, first of all, that was absolutely amazing. Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure to see this virtually twice now and in person once. The only downside with the virtual one is that you don't get the lovely stickers that you give away.
Yeah, I've still got loads of the things as well. So
Yeah,
like
yeah.
maybe I'll have to find a way to start doling them out
That'd
to
be
people.
great. And I think all of us that are on the call can relate to all of those mental monsters and how they show up in different situations. And that's nothing to be shameful of, right? Because it's the way it works. But we've got our monster slayer to hopefully beat them away. Love the models, love the confidence canvas, and the practical tips that you've offered us all to deal with these little imposters. I can't wait as well to see, I'm showing my age here, Helen, but I used to have Mr. Men books when I was there, and I just can't wait to see these wonderful pictures that you've co-created with your family turning up in a book one day.
I'm still working on it. We've still got, we're forever drawing new ones. They come out all the time. So at some point, yeah, probably do need to try and get them in a book, don't I?
And Noz has just said that she's still got her Monster Slayer sticker. That's fantastic. There's no new questions that have come through, but there are a couple of lovely comments in the chat. Noza, do you just want to come off mute and on camera and just share the wonderful things that you've popped in the chat? Thank you.
Yeah, I think what I've shared is I actually stopped apologizing for crying in front of people whenever I feel like tearful. I do tend to just let them go because I feel it's a really great way to release the tension, the stress that's accumulated in our bodies. And especially as you were going through the presentation, Helen, I was thinking about the past period. The last month has been really a challenge for me as the organization was facing a major incident in Scotland, and there was like a task force, and we needed to deliver at pace. So I think it's important to remind ourselves of those emotions that can easily creep in and make us feel vulnerable and comfortable. And also something you talked about, reaching out for help, for support. I felt less lonely when I shared that with my VA team. And I was really surprised with the help and support I could get. And they say like a problem shared is half solved. So I think it's great. And I'm not particularly someone who's like easily go and ask for help. So it was really great to see that support from my team. And I know now that whenever I feel I'm not that good, I'll go and reach out for that support I need. So thank you for the presentation, Helen. And you particularly, like we've talked before, and outside the presentation, you were one of the people who also supported me in this process to help process the things I'm thinking. So thank you so much for that.
No, thank you as well. And I think it's really, as I say, sharing these things, as we've said all along, the more we do it, the more it opens the door for other people. So yeah, I think, and I think it's great to hear that you stopped apologising for feeling, because we're all human beings, okay, and actually we all need those moments where we can be allowed to be exactly that. We can be fallible, we can be vulnerable, and we can ask for support. It's really important that we don't continue to kind of brush it under the carpet. And I think even more so nowadays, I think part of the reason why this topic seems to resonate quite a lot with so many people is, there's a lot of us that are working virtually. It's harder sometimes to be able to reach out to somebody. You're not just sat at a desk next to someone. It can feel so much more difficult to ask for help. So yeah, I think it's important. I did see a comment. I think it was somebody talking about a counterpart to the mental monsters, something more positive.
Yeah, the yin and the yang. I was just about to mention the same. Yeah.
Which I really love. And actually, I think I remember you, Jason, commenting on this when I did this at the conference. And yes, I think that is a really important thing to do. So I think that's a great idea. I have a set of characters called the Wellbeing Warriors that are tucked away, that are sort of the counterparts to this one. So yeah, maybe that's the next thing to think about. And I'd love to hear, like, from other people if they've got any ideas on what those Wellbeing Warriors could be.
There's an open invite right there. Some lovely comments in the chat, Helen, thanking you for your session. Meryl says, one thing that helped me calm down is acknowledging everyone has gone a step up in their career or life, has had moments of doubt. Great, absolutely spot on. It's about accepting your fears and finding ways to deal with it. And Manisha says, it was a very relatable and helpful session for me as someone who's just in the starting phase. Thank you for the session.
I think,
and various other votes of thanks that have come through.
And I think it's so one of the first things that kind of allowed me to take a breath in my own life was, I remember hearing one of the very senior managers in the organisation that I worked come out of a briefing that she'd just done. And she'd come across brilliantly. She'd stood up in front of a room full of 100 people. She talked, and then she came out, and I suddenly saw that mask drop, saw her look panicked, and she just turned to me and she went, "Did I make any sense? Did I mess that up?" And it was just that real moment where I was like, "Oh my gosh, it's not just me. This like incredibly successful, senior person is there having the same panicky moment." And I think it allows you to just kind of relate to people. So again, just remember that you really aren't alone. And even those people that look like they've got it all together, and you're sitting there going, "Why aren't I feeling that way?" They're probably not either, if truth be told.
Well, before we bring the session to an official close, many thanks to you again, Helen, and thank you to everybody that's joined us tonight and for all of your engagement. It's been absolutely fantastic for those people that have opened out. Absolutely wonderful. That's what this BA community is all about. Helen, I'm sure many people on the call will want to stay in touch with you. So we will share the links as Noz has just done in the chat. So LinkedIn, I guess, is an ideal platform for you, Helen, to re-engage with folk on here. And if they've got afterthoughts, they can communicate with you on there.
Totally. Always happy for people to reach out and slide into the DMs, as they say, and ask about any questions they've got. Yeah.
I can confirm that. I really admire your give back energy, and you always pushing for the community and bringing people together.
100%. One of our fantastic advocates and people that's always pushing for that, Helen. So thank you. Just one shameless plug at the end, which Nozra will also put in the chat. For those people that are based in and around York or up in the north of England, there will be an in-person event next week happening at the Everyman Cinema in York. Interestingly, I did ask them if they had a projector and a screen, and they didn't, but they do in the main cinemas, but they don't for presentations, but we've hired one, so no panic. There's going to be two fabulous speakers. We've got the wonderful Charlie Bailey and Mark Cross. Charlie's going to be talking about how BAs can thrive in times of change and build resilience. And Mark's going to talk about how we navigate through the growing importance of cybersecurity in our organisations. So, a great event to look forward to. 5:30 till 8 o'clock, Everyman Cinema in York next Wednesday. And importantly, there will be free food and free drink and networking. What could be better than that?
You know how to sell it to people, Jason.
We do our best, and we're not on commission, Helen. Is there anything else that we want to raise, Nozza, or can we close the call?
I think we can close. Just want to thank everyone. Thank you, Helen, for your time, and for everyone for spending this hour with us. And we hope to see you and meet you in person in the next events.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of the day and a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.